The Josiah Manifesto came out just last month. This just was released, and there's already things that are coming true. On Friday night, the night before the invasion from Gaza, that was the worst invasion of Israel in decades, and the worst single day since the Holocaust. The night before, I was sharing at the congregation I lead, and I'm led to speak from the book, from one mystery, which is the 50-year mystery, and how the 50 years, there's this parallel that keeps happening. And I speak specifically about 1970 to 2020, and actually it goes 72 to 22. But the next gigantic event in 1973 was the Yom Kippur War.
That's very interesting to hear. And you wanted to add a question to this interview because many people are thinking, okay, these events happened in 2020, right? But what's happening right now is what is shaking me up, what we've heard about the attack on Israel. What does this book have to do with that? And was there something predicted in this book that has to do with what just occurred in Israel?
Troy, if we had done this, maybe it was good that we're doing it now. If I had done it a week ago, I wouldn't be sharing what I'm about to share.
Hey y'all, this is Troy Black. So I have Jonathan Cahn with me today, and he is going to be talking about an ancient mystery that he has just described in detail in his new book, The Josiah Manifesto. So Jonathan, could you just start us out and maybe reveal a little bit about what this mystery is?
Yeah, it's in one hand, the Josiah Manifesto opens up many mysteries, and yet they all converge to then open up an answer. And that is, I would say, what if the Lord was showing us where we are prophetically and where we're heading and what we need to know for what is coming in the days ahead? What if he was giving a blueprint from his word, but that's appointed for now, about how to stand, how to survive, how to thrive in what is coming in the days ahead, in the end times? That is what the Josiah Manifesto is going to open up. The subtitle is The Ancient Mystery and Guide for the End Times. And I've never written a book that has so much dealing with the answer or what to do specifically. Imagine if there was an ancient calendar from God that actually told us events that happened in our time down to the exact days, that there's a mystery that we've all been going through, and yet there's a message in it, and it's going to be opening that up. And in many ways, Troy, many of the books that I've written or the mysteries I've dealt with are coming home and coming together in the Josiah Manifesto. And when they come together, they open up a key, which is the last part of it. The last third is, in a sense, the manifesto or the guide or the blueprint about what to do, about how to live, how to overcome, what we need to know for the end times. So I think it's one of the most important books I could have written.
Yeah, I agree. And, you know, many believers especially are asking this question, and even people that are not Christians are asking the question, what is happening in the world today? Are we nearing the end of time itself? And as believers, what should we do about it? But also, what do we need to know as we move forward in this time in history? And one of the things you mentioned was how all of these mysteries that you've written about are kind of correlating, or they're coming together, converging. And I especially saw that as I read through this book. I loved the book, by the way. Literally had me in tears in one chapter, you know, and then on the edge of my seat in the next.
Wow.
And the way that you finish it out, you round it out, pointing to the answer is, I think, critical for believers for today, for the time that we're in. But you open up the book with this very interesting and intense story about a visit to Cuba. Could you maybe share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I was asked to go to Cuba because Fidel Castro was opening up the island for 1 month of religious freedom. And the Christians of Cuba asked me to come and open it up, sounding the shofar. So I did on one end of the island. It was for 1 month. And I journeyed across the island, and it ended up in Havana, in Revolution Square, where Fidel Castro came.
Wow.
And a million things happened. And the theme was that God kept giving me the Jubilee, the Jubilee, the Jubilee. And that's what the amazing thing happened with someone who the Lord, my translator, we ended up being brought back to the place where his family lost his land. And the Jubilee is everyone shall return to their land. But we had no idea. He had no idea. But anyway, God was doing all these signs of the Jubilee. And it ended up, so I'm in Havana, and I'm invited to go into the presidential palace. And I knew I was going to, because before I went to Cuba, someone had given me a word that I was going to enter the king's palace. So I was ready, and I brought in 3 things for Fidel Castro. One was a Bible, which were banned at the time. 2 was a prophetic object linked to the Jubilee, the shofar, with an engraved scripture on it. And the third was a message that was, I put a prophetic word that I gave to Castro on a sheet of paper, which is also linked to the Jubilee. And it turned out that the object and the message gave Castro how much time he would have left in power before and then the end of his reign. And it would come to pass, according to the mystery of the Jubilee, down to the year, to the month, the week, the day, and even to the hour of the end of his reign. And it was all linked to the mystery of the Jubilee from the Lord. And that opens up this other side of the Jubilee. And that is, it doesn't just give back what you lost. If you took something that wasn't yours, then in the year of Jubilee, it's taken from you. In the case of Fidel Castro, his power was taken. But this affects America. This has affected all of us. This mystery kind of gets bigger and has affected every one of our lives. And that's the next part that it opens up.
Wow. Yeah. And even for those listening who don't live in the United States of America, some of the events that occurred in 2020 that you're about to talk about didn't just affect America, they affected the world. But you show in the book how there was a pivotal climax of events happening here in the United States. And even what you talk about with the Jubilee and the mystery behind this, the principles found in God's word and the precedent set up does affect the entire world, even for those who don't live in the United States. But this is what's so crazy to me, Jonathan, is that starting with those events in Cuba, where you talk about the mystery of the Jubilee and this 50-year timeline, you open the book with Cuba and you end the book with Cuba. And I'm not going to give the ending away. Y'all are going to have to grab a copy yourselves of the Josiah Manifesto to read what happens. But what you show is that this is not just biblical text being applied to our world today, but it's God showing up and God doing something that only he could do and orchestrating events that only he could orchestrate. So with what happened in 2020, how does this mystery of the Jubilee apply? And what did we see happen there?
The principle of the Jubilee, again, is the 50th year. Everything gets reversed. You know, if you lost something, you get it back. If you took something, it's taken. Everything is reversed in the year of Jubilee. The other principle is that Jeremiah, the prophet, when he spoke to Israel and he's prophesying over the valley of Hinnom, where they offered up their children as sacrifices, he said, what you did, if you shed the blood of children, well, your judgment's coming. Your blood will be shed. The nation would be judged. And so what a nation does to its children comes back. You cannot do this without consequence. And so if you take the 50th year, you take, when did America begin shedding the blood of its children? Well, it was in 1970. 73 was Roe versus Wade. But 1970 is when abortion on demand began in America. And it actually, when you go to the Jubilean year of that, it takes you to 2020, where something happens, where a plague comes on the world and on America particularly. And the thing is that Jeremiah says that one of the ways that the judgment came back to Israel is through a great plague or a mass pandemic, the Hebrew can be translated into. And so we have that. But it's more specific, and that is that America, the day that it actually moved toward abortion, the day that the entrance of abortion came, was on January 20th, 1970, when the first bill that was going to bring abortion to America was presented to the New York legislature, January 20th. If you go 50 years later, it takes you to January 20th, 2020. Anything happened? That is January 20th, 2020 is the exact day that the plague, the pandemic, officially enters American soil. It's 50 years to the exact date. And then we all remember that's when it entered, but when it fell was in March, when everything closed down, everything, our lives were changed. There was one particular day, the media calls it the day that changed everything. It was when Trump went on the air, addressed the nation, and America came under a quarantine. We were quarantined. The lockdowns began. The stock market crashed. It was the day that they first called it the pandemic. And so it was March 11th. If you go back 50 years, anything happened. March 11th, 1970. March 11th, 1970 is the day that abortion on demand began on American soil. We began killing our children. And so 50 years again to the exact date. And the other thing is, you mentioned something, Troy, which is important, that it wasn't just America, it was the world. But the thing is that it focused on America more than any other place. But the interesting thing is that this generation, America led much of the world into abortion, but this generation of the entire world has killed more children than any other generation in history. And so this generation was the generation that pioneered it, was just coming kind of to the end. And then this plague strikes, And abortion is the sin of the old against the young. A strange
Mhm.
property of this plague is that it overwhelmingly spared the young and struck the old. So it was an entire global phenomenon, but it had its fury on America, and America is crucial in this. So all these things
Wow.
happen, like, and that's not the only one. They happen 50 years to the exact date again and again and again.
Yeah, and that's what I saw as I read through the book is this is not just one correlation, that you found. This is God's hand orchestrating one event after another with a 50-year gap in between. It
Yeah,
it really is. It's crazy when you think about it,
yeah,
but it's not crazy. It's God,
yeah.
and it's sobering to look at the events and how they correlate. You specifically mentioned earlier the Valley of Hinnom from
Yes.
the book of Jeremiah. What does that specifically have to do with what happened in 2020?
Yeah, well, the principle is not only a principle of time, but a principle of space, and that is that Jeremiah says the judgment's going to come back to the ground on which you shed the children's blood, and so that was the Valley of Hinnom. And so, does America have a Valley of Hinnom? It does. It's New York. New York is the place it spread to the continent of America. New York
Right.
was pivotal, but also New York is the abortion capital of this nation. More children
Mm.
are killed there than any other place. So the amazing thing, you look now 50 years later, what happens? When the plague comes, what happens to America? What happens is, first of all, America becomes the global epicenter very quickly. And then at the same moment, New York becomes the epicenter of America, becomes the global epicenter within that. New York's a little sliver of land. And yet,
Yeah.
in the height of this, 1 out of every 2 cases in America was in the little tiny land of New York. And in fact, on April 10th of that year, it reached its peak, a milestone where there were more cases of the plague in New York than any other nation, including China, in the world. Little New York, April 10th.
Wow.
Well, if you go back 50 years from April 10th is the day that New York legalized abortion. Again, 50
Whoa.
years to the exact date. And the other thing is that, another principle in the Bible is the principle of the gate, that it says judgment comes to the gate. And Jeremiah prophesied by the gate overlooking Hinnom, and they killed their children by the gate. Well, New York is also the gate of America. And so it all happened
Right.
there. But a gate's also where something comes through. So the other thing is, it was that abortion spread to and through New York to America. In fact, in those first 3 years from the entrance to Roe versus Wade, the majority of abortions were performed in New York. So then we come back 50 years later, and amazing thing, scientists discovered that the virus actually bore the genetic markers that meant that if you had COVID, most likely the majority of cases in America came through the gate where we killed our children 50 years before. And then and
Wow.
then at the same time in 1970, there was one other gate, which was number 2, and that was the Western Gate, and that was Washington State. Well, in 2020, the plague came through New York and Washington State. Patient 0 landed in Washington State and came in. It was the day it began was 50 years from when it started in New York. I mean, so you could not put this together. If you had COVID, 95% chance that virus bore the markers of the 2 gates where we killed our children, began the killing 50 years before.
Wow. It's incredible, to think about just how God orchestrated those things and really is a sign to the nation, and it's
Yeah,
a sign to the world. And my prayer is that this book would not just be read by Christians, but by the culture as well.
yeah,
Because the more that I believe the culture sees the hand of God at work, the same way with the children of Israel in Egypt, they
yeah,
saw the hand of God at work. And yes, the king kept hardening his heart, and eventually God had to harden his heart as well. But the signs were there to attest to the fact that God was speaking the truth and that they needed to stop doing things their own way and do things God's way. So I
yeah,
believe that God is going to use this book in that way. But this
yeah.
is something that's very interesting to hear. I just got an email this morning, and you wanted to add a question to this interview
Oh,
because
yeah,
many people are thinking, okay, these events happened in 2020, right? But what's happening right now is what is shaking me up, with what we've heard about the attack on Israel recently. What does this book have to do with that? And was there something predicted
yeah.
in this book that has to do with what just occurred in Israel?
Troy, if we had done this, maybe it was good that we're doing it now. If I had done it a week ago, I wouldn't be sharing what I'm about to share. It says it's the guide to the end times, but there are things in it that this came out just last month. This just was
Right.
released, and there's already things that are coming true. On Friday night, the night before the invasion from Gaza, that was the worst invasion of Israel, I mean, in decades, and
Yeah.
the worst single day since the Holocaust of what happened when
Wow.
Hamas came in and did these horrible things on the start of this war. But the night before, I was sharing at the congregation I lead, New Jersey. It's Friday night, and I'm led to speak from the book, from one mystery, which is from the Design Manifesto, which is the 50-year mystery. We're doing some of it now. There's more, with that. But so I'm talking about the 50-year mystery and how the 50 years, there's this parallel that keeps happening. And I speak
Right.
specifically about 1970, as we're talking now, to 2020. And actually, it goes 72 to 22 and 1973 to events in 2023. I bring it up to really the kind of beginning of 2023. The next gigantic event in 1973 was the Yom Kippur War. That was the next
Wow.
calamitous thing on this schedule. So if I was
Yeah.
just going by this mystery in this calendar, I would go there. But I wasn't thinking about it, Troy. So I just
Yeah.
was led on Friday to share all about the 50 year and leave it up to 1973, 2023. Well, it turned out that night
Wow.
was, when I'm talking about the 50th anniversary, things happening to the day, it was the 50th anniversary of the Yom Kippur War. And
Wow.
that very night, before it was over in the West, something was beginning in the Middle East that very night. And so what happened was the parallel event, it kept going. The parallel event, we're talking about parallels event. Well, the next
Hmm.
parallel event was that invasion. Everybody keeps saying Yom Kippur War because it was the first time in 50 years exactly that there was a ground invasion of Israel. First time in 50 years that Israel was caught by surprise. As in the Yom Kippur War, 50 years before, it happened on a Saturday, the Sabbath. As in the Yom Kippur War, it happened on a Hebrew holy day. The most dramatic.
Wow.
So you kept hearing this all over the news, just like they were talking about Roe versus Wade, and they're saying it's 50 years, 50 years. Without knowing it, the whole world is talking about 50 years. That was the next event on this mystery that I just put in the Josiah Manifesto, just came out 30 days before. And it literally happened again. It literally happened. It's affecting our world.
Yeah. Wow. It's the Lord speaking very clearly.
Yeah, and Troy, the other thing is, listen, I'm not claiming, I don't claim that I know, anything. But
Right.
and the fact is, I was not thinking about the fact that it was the 50th anniversary on Friday night at all. It just
Right.
went by. And I was thinking only like I'm led to share about the 50-year mystery. So, God is in charge, but
Hmm.
he has a way of making things known.
Yeah. I believe he's using this ancient calendar to
Yeah.
literally
Show
spell
himself.
out exactly what's happening
Yeah.
today.
The other thing is there are many things in Israel's history that have happened according to this 50-year thing. It's almost like I did a book called The Oracle before, which is about all the 50, in a positive way, the restoration of Israel all happens on the 50 and the 50 and 50. So now
Right.
this does too. So there's so much to this.
Wow.
And it's not just Israel. This is all affecting the world.
Wow. Yeah. So I'll put a link to that book below as well if y'all haven't read that. But
Sure.
if you want to get a copy, for those listening, of the Josiah Manifesto, it just came out a month ago. There's going to be a link below this video on YouTube that you can click, a direct link. But Jonathan, could you let people know where else they could find a copy of this book? And also, if there's anywhere else they can follow you?
Sure. Yeah. The Josiah Manifesto is literally everywhere, Amazon, everywhere online, Walmart, every bookstore. But I pray people get it not just for themselves, but get it for, as Troy said, for people in your life, people who don't know the Lord, and unbelievers.
Yeah.
It's very hard to argue with it, because they lived through this to see the hand
Right.
of God. And also for people who know the Lord, but they need to be strong about the days ahead and what's coming and how to stand for God. So as far as the ministry, one of the ministries I lead that's on the web is hopeoftheworld.org. Compassion projects around the world, the gospel, and all my teachings are there. We send out free CDs and all sorts of stuff. So it's hopeoftheworld.org. And then, of course, I'm on YouTube and Facebook and all those things, And I occasionally, we'll put a prophetic word up.
That's awesome. And I'm going to put as many of those links as I can below as well.
Thank you, Troy. You're a blessing. Thank you.
Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me today. Thank you for sharing these things with us. I love y'all so much, and I will see you next time.